When the neighbors saw the crime scene cleanup crew arrive, they thought the worst had already happened. They didn't know the body was still inside the house. They didn't know it was inside a fish tank. And they didn't know whoever did it would walk free. Welcome back to the Friday Night Campfire Stories, where we gather around the fire and share the darkest true stories from the shadows. I'm Rob, and I'll be your host for this evening. This is my true crime series, Far From Fiction, telling stories so strange that you wish that they were made up. Before we dive in, just a quick reminder that my latest horror collection, The Hollow Season, is available on Amazon. If you enjoy stories that make your skin crawl, you won't want to miss it. And I'm currently on a mission to hit 2,500 subscribers by the end of the year. If you want more true crime and horror every single week, hit that subscribe button and join the campfire today. Tonight we're traveling to the quiet streets of San Francisco, where a missing man, a BMW, and a tank of chemicals would unravel one of the city's most disturbing unsolved crimes. Welcome to my series, Far From Fiction. Before he was the center of one of San Francisco's strangest murder cases, there was just Brian. Brian David Egg was born 1953. He grew up surrounded by the city's ever-changing heartbeat, a place where he carved out his own small, colorful life. For years, Brian had been a bartender at a place called The Stud, a legendary local LGBTQ bar, where his friends remembered him as warm, talkative, and genuinely interested in lives of everyone who crossed paths with him. He was the kind of person who would remember your drink, your birthday, and the stories you told him last week. In 1976, he bought a modest home in the city's south of Market District. Long before the tech boom would change the neighborhood forever, that house, with its old dog and ever-rotating cast of friends and guests, was more than a place to live. It was a refuge for people who had nowhere else to go. But Brian's generosity came with risk. His friends stated that he had an open-door policy, sometimes to people that he barely even knew. He was more trusting, maybe too trusting. And in the summer of 2018, that kindness would be exploited in a way that no one could have ever imagined. To understand how a well-loved neighbor could vanish without a trace, we need to go back to the last days anyone saw Brian alive, and the strange chain of events that followed. It was the summer of 2018, the kind of summer where the fog rolled heavy over San Francisco, muting the city's colors and sounds. In the heart of North Beach on Clara Street lived a man named Brian Egg. His home, a modest yet charming place, was tucked away in the city's bustle, a safe haven that he had made his own. Friends and neighbors knew Brian as a private man, but one who could be warm and welcoming to those he trusted. On August 4th, 2018, Brian's neighbors began noticing something unusual. A man they didn't recognize was coming and going from his home. He wasn't friendly, he didn't introduce himself, and he seemed to be avoiding eye contact. Over the next few days, a few more unfamiliar faces appeared. The normally quiet, predictable routine at Brian's house was replaced with strange activity at odd hours. By August 7th, the neighbors' unease had grown. One man in particular, described as tall and thin with a scruffy appearance, was seen hauling cleaning supplies into the house. Bleach, mops, and heavy-duty garbage bags. When the neighbors asked where Brian was, the stranger claimed that he was away or on vacation. But those that knew Brian well found that explanation odd. He barely traveled, and if he did, he always told one of the neighbors that he was going to be leaving. 5 days later, on August 12th, police were called to the house, but not for a missing person. They were called for a welfare check after multiple reports of suspicious behavior. When officers arrived, the stranger inside were evasive. They claimed once again that Brian was away, but something in their tone, something in their hurried manner, made the officers uneasy. The house smelled strongly of chemicals. Furniture had been moved, and yet there was no sign of Brian Egg. Not a single piece of evidence that he had left town, no bags packed, no note, no cell phone calls to friends. It was as if he simply vanished. For weeks after Brian Egg vanished, his home on Clara Street seemed wrong. The once lively front step where the neighbors would often see him come and go were silent. Curtains stayed drawn, mail began to pile up, and yet sometimes lights flickered inside late at night. Concerned neighbors began calling the SFPD, reporting the strange activity, but at first those calls didn't really seem to go anywhere. Police did show up, but ultimately it led to nothing being found. They did feel strange about the situation, but they couldn't find anything that would cause concern or panic. That was until the third welfare check was performed, and this time, they found all they had been looking for. On the third call, police were called once again, but this time they had backup. Not from the homicide detectives, but from the fire department hazardous material team. They'd receive a tip about something dangerous inside. Inside Brian's home, investigators found a massive fish tank. At first glance, it seemed empty, but the water was foul, reeking of chemicals. When they drained it, the horror became clear. Inside were human body parts, discolored, decomposed, and partly concealed under a layer of grime. After testing the remains, it was confirmed that it belonged to Brian Egg. But in this moment, all the police knew was that an elderly man had been murdered, dismembered, and hidden in his own home, in plain sight. By the time San Francisco police fully realized what they had stumbled into in 2268 Clara Street, the scene had already been disturbed in ways that made investigators' heads spin. After the discovery of the fish tank with its gruesome contents, on August 15, 2018, police began piecing together a troubling series of events. Neighbors reported in the weeks before the search 2 strange men had been seen coming and going from Brian's home. None of the neighbors recognized them, and their presence raised eyebrows, especially when they began moving items in and out of the home. But it wasn't just the strangers that seemed odd. Several witnesses claimed they'd seen a professional cleaning crew at the property before the police ever searched it. This wasn't just a maid service, no, this was a professional forensic cleaning crew. The crew wasn't there to mop up ordinary dirt. They reportedly were hauling out large quantities of items, cleaning the walls and floors, even painting over some of the areas inside the home. To those that had knew Brian, it felt like they were scrubbing away more than dust. Investigators confirmed that a private crime scene cleanup company had been hired, but when they tracked the request back, the paper trail led them not to a grieving family member or the property manager, but to one of the very strangers who had been staying in Brian's home. The name that came up was Lance Silva, a man with a criminal history involving fraud and theft. Police learned that Silva had used a credit card belonging to Brian to pay for the cleaning service. This wasn't a mere tidying up request. It was suspiciously timed, coinciding with the last known sighting of Brian and with increasingly frantic calls from the neighbors to the police about his welfare. That wasn't the only charge that came back to Brian after his disappearance. There was another purchase with a much higher price tag. A new BMW had been purchased with Brian's money, and seen driving that said car was none other than Lance Silva. Silva wasn't alone, though. He had been frequently seen with another man. Robert McCaffrey was later identified as the man. He had also come from a long criminal history, including charges for assault and theft. McCaffrey was reportedly living at the house with Silva in the weeks after Brian vanished. On August 24, 2018, police moved in on Robert McCaffrey, who was the first one to be arrested, charged with homicide, elder abuse, and financial crimes. Silva was taken into custody soon after on unrelated warrants, but quickly connected to the case as well. What baffled many was how long it had taken for police to intervene. Despite multiple welfare calls from the neighbors going back weeks, by the time the arrests were made, Brian's remains were so badly decomposed that determining an exact cause of death was nearly impossible. The investigation began to focus not only on who had killed Brian, but also the chilling question of why, and what exactly happened inside that house before the body was hidden in the tank. The 2 men were arrested in connection with the gruesome discovery. Neighbors had recalled seeing both men at Brian Egg's home in weeks leading up to his disappearance, sometimes going in and out of the house, other times even answering the door as if they lived there. Police suspected that the pair had moved into his home without permission and possibly taken advantage of his trust, a theory strengthened by reports from friends who described Brian as generous to a fault. When detectives brought them in, the hope was that questioning would unravel the mystery. After all, a dismembered body had been found in Brian's home. Who else could possibly be at fault? But in reality, the case against them began to unravel almost immediately. The prosecution had no surveillance footage showing the men committing any crimes, no DNA tying them directly to the dismemberment, and crucially, no confirmed cause of death for Brian Egg. The medical examiners determined the remains were too decomposed to pinpoint exactly how he died. And the strongest piece of circumstantial evidence, that Silva had reportedly hired the professional cleaning crew to scrub down the crime scene and had paid them with cash. But without proof that he was the one who had killed Brian, or even that Brian had been alive when Silva entered the home, the case became a legal tightrope. After just a few days in custody, both men were released. No charges. To many in the community and Brian's family, the decision felt like a gut punch. A man had vanished, his remains chopped up and hidden in his own home, and yet the only people known to be inside the home after his disappearance were allowed to walk free. Police defended the move, stating that there wasn't enough evidence to file charges that would hold up in court. And while that might be legally sound, it left an undeniable feeling of injustice hanging over the case, one that still lingers 7 years later. Today, 7 years after the death of Brian Egg, remains an open wound in the heart of San Francisco. His home on Clara Street is no longer his. It's sold and renovated, the once familiar facade now just another piece of the city's ever-changing skyline. But for those that knew him, the house is still haunted, not by ghosts, but by unanswered questions of what happened within its walls. The two men that were once prime suspects in the case and seemed like the only ones who could have at least known what happened to Brian Egg, the same men who were seen in Brian's homes in his final days and after his disappearance, the same men who were connected to the gruesome cleanup, walked the streets as free citizens. The San Francisco Police Department maintained that there simply wasn't enough evidence to secure a conviction. Without eyewitnesses, without clean forensic proof tying them directly to the killing, the case stalled. For many, that reasoning felt like an unbearable failure. How could body parts be found in a man's home, a professional cleanup crew brought in, and yet no one be held accountable? Friends of Brian say that the silence from the justice system has been deafening. And while investigators insist the case remains open, years have passed without any meaningful updates. The city has appeared to move on, but for those who remember Brian Egg, a kind, eccentric, deeply private man, time hasn't dulled the anger or grief. His killer, or killers, have never been brought to justice, and unless new evidence comes to light, the mystery of Brian's final moments may forever be buried beneath layers of bureaucracy, missed opportunities, and the city's unwillingness to face the brutal truth. As we close out this episode, we give a somber tribute to Brian. His heart of gold and willingness to help may have been the cause for his unfortunate demise, but it is not to be forgotten. He was a man who cared for others more than himself, a man whose kindness was taken for weakness, most likely on multiple occasions, but he still opened his doors to anyone who needed it. Although the city and police department may have given up on Brian's life and legacy, we will not. We will continue to share stories like Brian's, with the hope of being able to shine lights of forgotten stories to help the voice of the voiceless. We know someone out there has a piece of information that can help resolve the case. They can give Brian Egg's family the justice they deserve. It's time to speak out now. You can call the number on the screen to share any information anonymously. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Far From Fiction. If you found it moving or something you would like to see more of, please consider hitting that subscribe button. I make true crime videos each and every Wednesday here on the Friday Night Campfire Stories YouTube channel. I'm currently on the road to 2,500 subscribers and I would like to hit that goal by the end of the year. You can do your part by hitting that subscribe button and sharing the video with others that you think would enjoy it. Also, if you are a fan of horror, then you would love my new book, The Hollow Season, that is now available on Amazon. The link is in the description. The Hollow Season includes 6 original scary stories perfect for the upcoming fall months. But that is going to do it for today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, stay vigilant, stay aware, and remember that not everyone is going to take your generosity as thankful as others. As always, thank you for spending a little bit of your evening here with me.